It's absolutely egregious and utterly disrespectful. The WNBA just allowed Caitlin Clark, the most important player this league has ever seen, the single human being responsible for every television contract, every sellout crowd, every conversation anyone outside of a hardcore fan base has had about women's basketball in the last 2 years, to get dropped on a basketball court by a deliberate targeted foul that the officials standing 3 feet away claimed they did not see. And then the head coach of the Indiana Fever, Stephanie White, went to her post-game press conference and called it absolutely unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable after the game, after Caitlin Clark was already hurt, after the damage was already done. Welcome back. This is Rim Run, and today we are documenting the moment the WNBA's protection racket collapsed in real time, exposing Stephanie White's post-game performance for exactly what it is, and making the case that this league has a catastrophic, undeniable, and completely self-inflicted crisis on its hands. One that starts and ends with how it treats the only player keeping the lights on. You know, as far as adjustments, like it's its next player up. Next player up. Stephanie White's loving this. Let me tell you what is actually at stake here before we get into the details, because the details are brutal, and I want you to understand the full weight of what happened before we walk through them one by one. Caitlin Clark is not just a good player. She is not just a fan favorite. She is the economic engine of an entire professional sports league. People schedule their vacations around her games. They drive for hours. They buy tickets in markets where the local team has never sold out a single game in its history. Television networks put her games in prime time and expect 3 million viewers. 3 million viewers for the WNBA. That is not normal. That is not something that happened before Caitlin Clark arrived. That is something one specific human being created with her talent, her work ethic, and her undeniable once-in-a-generation ability to make casual fans care about a sport they previously ignored completely. And the league, the people who run this league, the officials who are paid to protect the players on that court, the coaches who are paid to protect their own players, allowed her to get hit deliberately in the middle of a basketball court with cameras rolling, with officials standing right there, and nobody called a foul. Nobody stepped in. Nobody protected her. And now she is hurt. The primetime CBS game against the Los Angeles Sparks on June 27 is in serious jeopardy, and the people responsible are issuing post-game statements about how unacceptable it all was. Unacceptable. That word is going to come up a lot in this video. I want you to listen to how it sounds coming from the people who had the power to prevent this and chose not to use it, and then number 2, you're coming in here aware of what happened 2 nights ago, and that still happens? Here is what we know happened. Here is the factual record, documented, timestamped, undeniable. Alyssa Thomas of the Connecticut Sun delivered a deliberate vicious foul to Caitlin Clark in the middle of a live basketball game. Not a hard foul in the flow of play. Not an aggressive defensive move. A mugging. A targeted deliberate act of physical aggression against the most marketable player in the history of this league. The officials on the floor, the people whose entire job is to see exactly this kind of thing, said afterward that they did not see it happen. They did not see it. The ball was right there. The action was right there. At least one official should have been watching that exact spot on the floor at that exact moment. They either were not watching, which is gross negligence, or they were watching and chose not to call it, which is something far worse. Either way, the result is the same. Caitlin Clark went down, lay on the floor for an entire Connecticut Sun possession while her team played on around her and no whistle was blown. And this is not the first time. Let me be entirely clear with you about that. This is not a one-off incident. This is a pattern. 2 days before this game, there was already a documented incident involving Connecticut Sun players and physical contact with Caitlin Clark that was not adequately addressed. 2 days before this brutal play, the warning signs were already there. The conversation about whether Thomas and other Connecticut players would target Clark in a rematch was already being had publicly. The question was already out there, and the league, the officials, and the Indiana Fever coaching staff walked into that game knowing the threat was real and did nothing structurally different to protect their player. That is the part of this story that the post-game press conference statements do not address. That is the part that the absolutely unacceptable language conveniently skips over. The question is not whether what happened was unacceptable. Everyone agrees it was unacceptable. The question is, what did you do before the game to prevent it? What adjustments did you make after the first incident 2 days earlier? What message did the league send to Connecticut before this rematch to make clear that targeting Clark would carry consequences? The answer to all three of those questions appears to be nothing, absolutely nothing. Now, I told you that Stephanie White went to the post-game press conference and called this absolutely unacceptable. I told you she used that word, but I want you to hear her say it because hearing her say it in the context of what we just watched is the only way to fully appreciate the gap between the words and the reality. Don't take my word for it. Here is Stephanie White in her own words after the game. "It's absolutely egregious and utterly disrespectful," she said it with cameras rolling. Absolutely egregious and utterly disrespectful. Those are the words she chose, and I want you to sit with that for a second. Because here is the thing about those words. They are completely 100% correct. What happened to Caitlin Clark was absolutely egregious and utterly disrespectful. Stephanie White is not wrong about the description. She is wrong about the timing. She is wrong about the delivery. She is wrong about the fact that those words are coming out of her mouth in a press conference room after the final buzzer, instead of on the sideline, in real time, during the game, when she still had the ability to do something about it. Let me explain what I mean by that, because this is the core of the Stephanie White problem, and I am not going to let it slide. When your generational talent, the player your entire franchise is built around, the player who is responsible for every sellout crowd you have had this season, gets hit in the middle of a basketball court and goes down, your job as a head coach is not to wait until the post-game press conference to express outrage. Your job is to express it on the floor, in the moment, with your body, your voice, your willingness to take a technical foul, your willingness to get thrown out of the game, if that is what it takes to send a message to the officials, to the opposing team, and to your own players that this will not be tolerated. We have seen other coaches do exactly that. Sydney Johnson went absolutely nuclear on officials in a game just weeks before this incident. She lost her mind on that sideline. She made it impossible for the officials to ignore what was happening. That is what coaching looks like when you actually give a damn about protecting your players in real time. That is what leadership looks like when the moment demands it. Stephanie White stood on that sideline. She watched Caitlin Clark go down. She watched her lie on the floor for an entire Connecticut Sun possession, and she did not crash out. She did not get thrown out. She did not make the officials feel the weight of what they had just failed to call. And then she went to the press conference and said it was absolutely egregious and utterly disrespectful. That is not coaching. That is crisis management after the crisis has already happened. And I am not giving her credit for it. You know, as far as adjustments, like it's next player up. Next player up. Stephanie White's loving this. Let me now walk through the full scope of the failure here, because there are multiple layers to this and each one is more damning than the last. Layer 1 is the officials. The officials who were standing on that basketball court, who are paid professional referees, who are supposed to be watching the ball and the players around the ball, said they did not see the Alyssa Thomas foul. Let me say that back to you so you do not miss it. The officials did not see it with the ball right there in a live game situation with cameras capturing it from multiple angles. They did not see it. That is either the most catastrophic failure of attention in the history of officiating or it is something else entirely, and either answer is unacceptable. Either answer demands a response from the league that goes beyond a post-game statement. Layer 2 is the league itself. The WNBA has a documented, undeniable, catastrophic pattern of failing to protect Caitlin Clark from targeted physical aggression. This is not the first incident. This is not the second incident. This is a recurring pattern that has been covered by national sports media, called out by reporters like Christine Brennan, flagged by figures like Robert Griffin III, and discussed by former WNBA players like Stacey Dales, who by the way actually played in this league and knows what it looks like when a player is being deliberately targeted. Stacey Dales called this a pivotal moment in Caitlin Clark's season and career. She said it impacts a franchise. She said it impacts the whole league. She said, and I want you to hear this clearly, that the whole collective bargaining agreement was built on the back of one player. One player in the league is allowing that one player to get hit and fouled and targeted without adequate protection. Layer 3 is the comparison that nobody in the mainstream sports media wants to make, but that is completely, ruthlessly, unavoidably accurate. When Michael Jordan was the face of the NBA, when he was the brand, when he was the player that David Stern understood represented the entire financial future of the league, nobody got away with targeting him. Nobody delivered deliberate physical aggression against Michael Jordan without consequences. Horace Grant, Bill Cartwright, the entire Bulls roster understood their job was to send a message that you do not touch the franchise. David Stern understood his job was to back that message up with suspensions, with fines, with the full weight of the league office. Because Stern understood something that the current WNBA leadership apparently does not. When your franchise player is the brand, protecting that player is not optional. It is not a courtesy. It is a business necessity. The WNBA has one player right now who functions the way Michael Jordan functioned for the NBA in the late 1980s and early 1990s. One player who moves the needle. One player who fills arenas. One player who gets television networks to put games in prime time. And the league is not protecting her. The league is not sending the message that targeting her carries consequences. And that failure is going to cost this league in ways that will take years to fully understand. Layer 4 is the Phoenix Mercury. And I want to spend a moment on this because it is its own separate level of disgraceful. The Phoenix Mercury, a franchise, an organization with a social media team, with people who are paid to represent the brand, posted content after this incident that was, by any reasonable standard, completely and utterly indefensible. The post depicted what appeared to be a young woman lying on the ground, and it was posted in the context of what had just happened to Caitlin Clark on that basketball court. I am not going to speculate beyond what is documented. What I will say is that a professional sports franchise posting that kind of content in that context, in that moment, is a gross failure of judgment that demands a public apology and immediate deletion. The social media administrator responsible for that post should face consequences. The Mercury organization should be embarrassed, and the league should be asking serious questions about what kind of culture allows something like that to happen. And then number 2, you're coming in here aware of what happened 2 nights ago. And that still happens? Now I want to get to the business reality of this situation, because the emotional outrage is justified and it is real. But the business reality is what should be keeping Kathy Engelbert and Adam Silver up at night. And I want you to hear Stephanie White acknowledge the injury situation in her own words before I make this argument. Because what she says, and more importantly what she does not say, is the second receipt in this story. Don't take my word for it. Listen to Stephanie White respond to a question about Caitlin Clark's health and what the team does if she misses time. Next player up. That is what she said. Next player up. As if Caitlin Clark is a rotational piece. As if the absence of the most important player in the history of this franchise, in the history of this league, is something you address with a next player up framework. Let that sink in for a second. The head coach of the Indiana Fever, when asked about the potential absence of the player responsible for every sellout, every primetime slot, every television contract negotiation leverage point this league has had in the last 2 years, responded with the next player up. That is the answer. That is what she gave the media. That is what she gave the fans who are sitting at home watching this and wondering whether the player they drove 3 hours to see is going to be on the court Saturday night on CBS. Let me now tell you exactly what is at stake in business terms, because this is not abstract. The Indiana Fever have a primetime game on CBS on June 27, this Saturday, against the Los Angeles Sparks. CBS paid for that game. CBS put it in primetime because Caitlin Clark is the draw. That game, with Caitlin Clark healthy and playing at full capacity, had the potential to pull 3 million viewers. 3 million viewers for a WNBA regular season game. That is a number that would have been unthinkable before Caitlin Clark entered this league. And now, because the WNBA failed to protect its most valuable asset, because the officials on the floor failed to call an egregious foul, because the head coach failed to create enough of a scene in real time to demand accountability, that game is in serious jeopardy. The audience that CBS paid for may not materialize. The viewers who were going to schedule their Saturday evening around watching Caitlin Clark play may stay home. And then, and this is the part that makes the scheduling situation even more infuriating, after June 27, the Fever do not play again until July 5. There is a gap of more than a week between games. More than a week during which the fan base has no Caitlin Clark to watch, no Fever game to attend, no reason to stay engaged with the WNBA product. If she is out for any portion of that stretch, the league loses the one thing it has been selling. And the people who run this league allowed a situation to develop where that was even possible. This is what happens when you do not protect your franchise player. This is what happens when the people who run the league operate as if Alyssa Thomas and Caitlin Clark are equivalent assets. They are not equivalent assets. From a pure business standpoint, from a television rating standpoint, from a ticket sales standpoint, from a social media engagement standpoint, from a league growth standpoint, they are not equivalent assets. Alyssa Thomas is a professional basketball player. Caitlin Clark is the reason this league has a future. Those are two different things. And the league's failure to treat them as two different things is the catastrophic self-inflicted wound at the center of this entire story. Let me now talk about the voices who called this out. Because the reaction to what happened to Caitlin Clark was not limited to fans and commentators on the internet. High-profile, credible, mainstream figures with real platforms weighed in. And the unanimity of the reaction tells you something important about how far outside the lines this incident was. Dave Portnoy called it out the same night it happened. Christine Brennan, and I want to be specific here, because Brennan is a serious journalist with a serious platform, wrote about it directly. She described the play as Alyssa Thomas delivering a fist to the throat of Caitlin Clark with no foul called. And she asked the question directly, will the WNBA finally act and suspend Thomas? That is a national sports journalist asking that question in print. That is not a fringe take. That is a credible reporter documenting a credible incident and demanding accountability. Robert Griffin III, Heisman Trophy winner, NFL quarterback, someone who played professional sports at the highest level and understands what targeted behavior looks like, said that Caitlin Clark and every WNBA player should be protected from this kind of targeted behavior. He said it publicly. He put his name on it. That is not nothing. Stacey Dales, who covered the NFL and who played in the WNBA herself, called this a pivotal moment in Caitlin Clark's season and career. She said it impacts a franchise. She said it impacts the whole league. And then she said something that I want to land with full force. The whole collective bargaining agreement was built on the back of one player. One player. The whole CBA was built on the back of one player. That is the acknowledgement from someone who played in this league that the economic reality of the WNBA right now is that Caitlin Clark is not just a star. She is the foundation. She is the reason the current CBA has the leverage it has. She is the reason television networks are paying what they are paying. She is the reason this league is having conversations about expansion and growth and relevance that it was not having 3 years ago. And the league allowed her to get hit, and the officials said they did not see it, and the head coach went to the press conference and said it was absolutely unacceptable. Now, I want to drop one more piece of audio for you because this is the clip that reframes everything. This is Stephanie White in the same post-game press conference making the acknowledgement that proves beyond any doubt that the coaching staff knew the threat was real going into this game. Don't take my word for it. Here is the key line in her own words. She said it. You're coming in here aware of what happened 2 nights ago and that still happens. She said it with cameras rolling in her own words. Aware. She used the word aware. The coaching staff was aware of what happened 2 nights prior. They walked into that game knowing the threat existed. They knew the history. They knew the pattern. They knew that Connecticut had already shown a willingness to play physically and aggressively against Clark, and they walked into that rematch aware of it, and it still happened and Caitlin Clark still went down and the officials still did not call the foul. That is the admission. That is the evidence. That is the moment where I didn't know it stops being available as an excuse for anyone involved. The coaching staff knew. The officials should have known. The league office should have known, and knowing it they collectively failed to prevent it. Let me now render the full verdict because this situation demands one.
Stephanie White needs to understand that post-game outrage is not coaching.
It is not protection. It is not leadership. It is a press conference, and press conferences do not protect Caitlin Clark from Alyssa Thomas. What protects Caitlin Clark is a head coach who crashes out on the sideline in real time, who makes the officials feel the full weight of their failure to call what is right in front of them, who sends a message to the opposing team that there will be a cost for targeting the franchise player. We have seen coaches do that. Sydney Johnson did it. It is possible. It requires a willingness to prioritize your player over your composure, and Stephanie White has not demonstrated that willingness when it matters most during the game, when the damage can still be prevented. The WNBA needs to suspend Alyssa Thomas, full stop. There is no argument against it that survives contact with the footage.
There is no framing of this incident that makes a suspension unreasonable.
The league also needs to rescind the technical foul that was called against Caitlin Clark in the previous game. A technical foul that was, by any honest assessment, a punitive call against the most important player in the league for the crime of reacting to being fouled. That technical foul was total nonsense when it happened, and in the context of what we now know about the pattern of targeting Clark, it looks even worse. The league needs to send a message, a clear, documented, enforceable message that Caitlin Clark will be protected. Not because she is special, not because she deserves preferential treatment, but because protecting your franchise player is the minimum requirement of running a professional sports league that wants to survive.
David Stern understood this.
When Michael Jordan was the brand, Stern made sure the entire league understood that Jordan was protected. That is not favoritism. That is basic business sense.
The WNBA's current leadership needs to find that same basic business sense before the window closes.
And the Phoenix Mercury, the franchise that posted that content after this incident, needs to delete it, issue a public apology, and figure out who made that decision and why.
That is not a difficult call. That is the minimum response to a gross failure of institutional judgment.
Let me be entirely clear about the business reality one final time, because I want every single person watching this video to understand the stakes. Alyssa Thomas is a professional basketball player. She is a veteran of this league. She has had a career. From a business standpoint, from a television rating standpoint, from a ticket sales standpoint, from a league growth standpoint, her absence from the WNBA would register as noise. Nobody outside of Connecticut Sun fans and hardcore WNBA followers would feel it. The league would continue, the games would be played, the product would go on. If Caitlin Clark is gone, if this injury is serious, if she misses significant time, if the primetime CBS game on June 27 becomes a fever game without Caitlin Clark, this league loses the one thing it has been selling.
The 3 million viewers CBS was expecting do not show up. The sellout crowds become regular crowds. The national media attention evaporates. The conversation about WNBA growth and expansion and relevance goes quiet because all of it, every single bit of it, is built on the foundation of one player being healthy and on the court. That is not an exaggeration. That is the documented, undeniable, brutal reality of where this league is right now. And the people who run it need to act like they understand that reality before the next incident happens. Because if the pattern continues, if the targeting continues, if the officiating continues to fail, if the coaching continues to respond after the fact instead of in the moment, there will be a next incident. And the next one might cost more than a primetime game. Caitlin Clark is right now, today, the most important active player in women's basketball. She is the player who changed the financial trajectory of this league. She is the player who made casual fans care. She is the player who made television networks compete for broadcast rights. She is the player who made people schedule vacations and drive hours and buy tickets in cities they have never cared about before. She is doing all of that right now, this season, through the targeting, officiating, and the technical fouls and the hits that do not get called. And she is still out there competing, still being aggressive, still being the player that this league needs her to be. That is what makes this situation so infuriating. She is holding up her end. She is showing up. She is delivering. And the league, the officials, and the coaching staff are not holding up theirs. Here is where I leave you. And I want this to be a forced choice because I think it is the most honest way to frame what happened. Two things are true simultaneously. First, Stephanie White's post-game comments were factually accurate. What happened to Caitlin Clark was absolutely egregious and utterly disrespectful. Second, those comments came too late, in the wrong venue, with zero ability to change what had already happened. So, here is the question I want you to answer in the comments right now, and I want a real answer, not a diplomatic one. Do you believe Stephanie White is the right head coach to protect Caitlin Clark going forward? Yes or no? Now she is doing her best. Now it is a difficult situation. Yes or no? Because the next game is coming, and the game after that is coming, and the pattern of targeting is not going away on its own. Somebody has to change it. The question is whether Stephanie White is capable of being that somebody in real time on the floor when it actually matters. Drop your answer below. Share this video if you think the conversation needs to be louder. Hit the notification bell so you do not miss what comes next, because this story is not over, and we will be here when the next chapter drops. This is Rim Run, and we will see you on the other side.